Peace.
Peace.
This is Joshua Miller Law, Mr. PhD. You're just now entering the cipher called Real to Real 360. K-Wise.
Peace, God.
Bring that beat in, kid.
Indeed.
Peace.
Yeah. What's going on, party people? Welcome to the Real 360 show. Let's get it in.
We do the knowledge and wisdom so you can understand. Real 360 shows in full command. We changing the game for how it all was taught. From bondage to freedom to an independent thought. Yo, the show is here to bring about a change for real. To lighten everyone so we all know the deal. 360 degrees is a fact. We created the show to give our love back to our communities so we can know what's going on and give them the support from knowledge to born. So if you're ready to learn, then it's time to go. Sit back and relax and enjoy your show. Peace.
Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to wherever you are on the side of the planet. This is DJ K Wise, one half of the Real 360 show, and I'm saying peace to all, peace to Allah's 5% nation of gods and earths, love, peace, and happiness to all the human families on the planet Earth. We have a dynamic and explosive episode for you this evening. What I want y'all to do right now is get your pen and your pad, take notes, and get ready for some explosive information. And I'm sure there will be many questions to flow, but we're going to get right into it. So I'm going to bring on my co-host with the most, none other than my brother in God, Joshua Miller Law, Mr. PhD. Peace, God.
Peace to all Allah's 5%. Peace to all our followers and listeners. Please like and subscribe on YouTube. Tell a friend, because today is going to be real informative. We're going to be talking about the viruses, the vaccines, and us, how the pandemic has affected us in the ways that we can protect ourselves going forward. Today, we have 4 doctors on our show that will be able to explain the vaccines and the viruses. We have Dr. Callahan, Dr. Irv, and Dr. Davis, and Dr. Henry. Please put your hands together and welcome them onto Real 360. All right. Is everybody in here? Right. All right. How y'all doing?
Good,
Good. Is we missing anybody?
There she goes. She just clicked back in. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this moment in time, we have all 4 of them on, and I want them to take a time out and introduce themselves to you and let y'all know who and what they are and what they do professionally. So, Dr. Callahan, if you don't mind going first.
No, not at all. So good evening to everyone. Hope you've had a rich day. The day's been full for me, but it's been wonderful in the same breath. I'm a pediatrician, general pediatrician. I practice in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I see kids from age 0.1 to age 21. And I also am the president and co-founder of a nonprofit, an educational nonprofit on health and wellness, and do a lot of other volunteer work around justice and advocacy. So I think that's enough about me.
Okay. Dr. Irvis, I hope I pronounced the last name correctly, Dr. Irvis. And would you like to introduce yourself to the followers and listeners? Is she frozen? She might be frozen. Dr. Henry, if you don't mind.
My name is Jennifer.
She froze.
Yeah, she's a little bad.
Frozen, yeah. She's in bad connection. Dr. Henry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, we can. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Uzama Henry. I am from Freeport, Long Island, and I currently live in the greater Washington, D.C. area. I am a pediatrician by training, and I did additional subspecialty training in infectious diseases. I currently work in vaccine development at a biotech company called Dynavax Technologies. I had the pleasure of having known Dr. Davis since high school and Dr. Callahan since medical school. So it's great to be with them today.
You said Freeport and DC. Wow. We'll talk about that offline.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. because we love that Exit 21 over here. I don't know about nobody else.
I'm very close to that Exit 21, or at least my parents used to be. That's where I grew up. Indeed.
Dr. Davis, even though this is your second time around, introduce yourself to our followers and listeners, please.
Yes, peace, good night. I'm Jermaine Davis. I'm an assistant professor of biochemistry at Meharry Medical College. I have a research lab that focuses on the basic science of health and disease. And so I've also started to work in engaging the community in understanding some of the diseases that disproportionately affect African Americans. So that's how I started working with Dr. Irvs, who's a colleague of mine. And as Dr. Henry and Callahan said, we've been collaborating on various aspects of, understanding health and disease for quite some time. So it's great to be back. I brought some great friends, and I'm sure there's a lot of questions that we can answer for people, and we're happy to be here.
Great. Let's just start it out. Dr. Irvs, are you in here? Are you in here with us, Dr. Irvs?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we
Yes.
can hear you now. So
Okay.
give you an opportunity to introduce yourself now and let them know what you do for a living.
Yes, so good evening. I'm Jennifer Irvs. I'm an associate professor at Meharry Medical College, and I develop programs to build people's confidence in vaccines. And so when COVID-19 came around, it was a great opportunity for me to work with Dr. Davis to identify those strategies. So thank you for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. First of all, we want to start out by asking where did the coronavirus itself derive from? Because we have heard a lot of different myths, and a lot of people have different things that they always say, well, it came from here, it came from here. And how did it get to us here in North America and in the United States?
So I can answer that. We've existed with viruses for centuries. So there's been viruses and bacteria that we kind of co-evolved with for quite some time. And coronaviruses is a family of viruses that have actually been studied for quite some time now. Even before the pandemic has started, there were a lot of research areas highlighting what these viruses are and how they work. So they're part of a class of viruses called zoonotic diseases. So all of these have basically originated in some animal. And throughout the course of their existence, they've been able to jump species. So jump from like tuberculosis, jump from cattle to humans. And so coronaviruses have been able to jump from different species. This latest one from bats into humans. And so there is this kind of co-evolution of these viruses. There's a large family of these viruses. But we've been studying how viruses work for quite some time, and we know overall how they work. Mm-hmm. One of the key things to remember is that just like we're trying to survive, viruses are trying to survive too. So they're trying to keep up to date with spreading and surviving, and the only way they can do that is if they infect an animal or human host.
Okay. Now, with humans, there's been a lot of discernment about the vaccine, and there's a bunch of vaccines that's out. Just recently, I've just heard that there's one that combats the Biocrom and the Acromom. I can't even pronounce the different parts of this coronavirus, but there's one that combats that. There's individuals like culturally, religiously that is against taking the vaccine because they say it had animal product or have foreign antibodies in it that can hurt us going forward. Is that true, false, or?
So there's a lot to unpack from that. There's many angles to that. So the vaccines, first and foremost, are safe. They've been tested. As I mentioned before, we've coexisted and had vaccines for decades, and it's really helped us survive in a lot of different ways. So particularly for the coronavirus vaccines, the ones that protect against COVID, they don't contain any animal products. They contain products that are natural to the body, like lipids. And this helps the body take up the vaccine and deliver it to our cells. So there's a lot of misinformation about what the vaccine actually contains. It doesn't contain any aspects of the virus except that mRNA. And that mRNA is the code that our cells use to make a protein called the spike protein. And that spike protein is what our body uses to develop antibodies to protect against the virus. So I'll let somebody else weigh in on other aspects of the question if they want.
Yeah, no, I just want to put a asterisk next to what you first said in terms of coronaviruses being zoonotic infections, and then comment a little bit about what you said about the vaccines, because it might not be obvious to you what it means when we say something is zoonotic. And what the significance of that is, as Dr. Davis already said, that means that there are species of viruses, for example, that can go between humans and between animals. Not every virus does that. Some only infect humans, for example, and then we can, or naturally only infect humans, and we can maybe get rid of those through vaccination. But there are other viruses, and coronavirus happens to be one of them, where they live in animals, they live in humans. Even if you got rid of it from the human population, it can always exist in a reservoir in an animal population, and then can always jump back into humans. And the fact that they live in multiple species also means that it increases the likelihood that different viruses from different species can combine to create what looks like new viruses. And that's what happened in 2019, because we've all had coronaviruses before, but in 2019, there was a novel coronavirus that we now refer to as SARS-CoV-2, and it causes the disease COVID-19. And that had to do with, again, a rearrangement of viruses that existed in animals and then came into people. Influenza does the same thing. Sometimes you hear people say swine flu or avian or bird flu. It's because influenza is a virus that can also go back and forth between hosts. And that's what makes the virus more fit, because it is now obtaining new genetic information that you may not have seen before, that I may not have seen before, and we don't have as effective antibodies to those viruses, and that's what makes them able to spread more efficiently and cause pandemics. Now, the vaccines now have been around for quite some time, and understandably, there was a lot of hesitancy around coronavirus vaccines in the beginning, and there continues to be some hesitancy. I think it's important for people to understand that vaccines are developed in a very, very regulated way. It isn't that companies or academic labs can just do whatever they want and get a vaccine on the market. One of the reasons why we got the vaccine so quickly, so early, is because there is a mechanism that the FDA has to allow us to use vaccines that can be helpful in an emergency situation. So you hear people say, well, I don't want to get it because it's not approved. That's what people said in the beginning. And they were authorized under this EUA, or emergency use authorization, because in a life-threatening situation, the government is not going to wait for full approval of the vaccine. They have an ability to have the vaccines used under a so-called emergency use authorization. Now, another reason it came out so quickly is because researchers understood that viruses like coronaviruses, because they are zoonotic, because they go between species, they have the capacity to rearrange and change themselves and show up as something almost completely new. Because that was known, folks at the National Institutes of Health, including a young Black woman who many of you will have heard of by now, Kizzmekia Corbett, they were working on how can we develop vaccines to prevent coronavirus infection. And they did that long before COVID-19 came on the scene. So that also helped us to get there faster. And now COVID vaccines have been used by an inordinate number of people all over the globe. Of course, in the US, we have had better access than many other countries to these vaccines. And surveillance is ongoing to evaluate the safety of these vaccines in large populations, because now they've been used, of course, in many, many millions of individuals. And as Dr. Davis said, they've been deemed safe. They certainly have side effects, but overall, the benefits of the vaccines outweigh the harm.
Now, pardon me one second, Kate. Now, you spoke about the Emergency Act that was used to get the vaccines out quickly. A lot of people was worried more so of the side effects that you were speaking about when it came down to these different vaccines, and were they properly tested before they were put out? And also too, that a lot of times they were saying that if you took the vaccine and something happened, that the pharmacy or pharmaceutical company would not be held liable. So that put a lot of fear in the community. Was it tested properly? Was it actually safe for us to take?
Yeah, so I can speak a little bit about how vaccines are developed. So all vaccines go through rigorous testing before they're authorized or licensed. And they progress through what we call phases of development. The first phase of development is what we call phase 1 studies. Those are relatively small studies with like 10, 20, 30, 40 participants. And really, you want to see in those studies, is this vaccine reasonably safe? If I give it to people, what kinds of side effects am I going to have? And I want to make sure there's not too many side effects and that those side effects are not severe. That's your phase 1 study. Then we go into phase 2 studies. And instead of talking about just tens of people, we're sort of talking in the hundreds. And here you want to have a sense, not only that the vaccine is safe, but now you're getting a bigger denominator, a bigger number of people injected to see if it's safe. But you also want to get a sense of, is it doing what we intend for it to do? Is it working? And one of the ways that they were able to at least gauge if coronavirus vaccines were working is to look at the antibody level that your body produced in response to the vaccine. And they were able to compare that to the level of antibody that someone who had the virus itself, had COVID, and recovered, what did their level of antibody look like? And they call that convalescent antibodies. And so in those studies where we didn't know if it worked or not, what they were able to see is that when we give this vaccine to people, their bodies are generating an immune response or antibody response that fights the virus. And it looks very similar to the level of antibody that someone who had the virus and recovered was able to generate. So that gives you a sense, okay, we're going in the right direction. And then they're doing phase 3, they've done already now, phase 3 studies. And phase 3 studies are not tens, they're not hundreds, they're thousands and tens of thousands of individuals, because now you want to take one group of people and give them the vaccine, and you want to take another group and give them what we call a placebo or a saltwater shot. And you want to see, does your vaccine prevent folks from getting the disease? And you're counting up of the 15,000 people in one arm, as we call it, of the study who got the placebo, there is, 100 infections. I'm just making it up. And then in the side that they got the vaccine, well, instead of 100, that was dropped down to only 10 infections. And you can see then that the vaccine is working because there are fewer cases in the vaccine group than in the placebo group. And those are the kinds of studies that were done with multiple vaccines to prevent coronavirus infections. And initially they showed very, very, very high efficacy. They worked very well. They prevented 90+% of the cases. So we do know that those vaccines work. And because of those relatively large trials with tens of thousands, and now our real world experience with millions and millions of people, we have a reasonably good sense of how the vaccine works in terms of the side effect profile as well.
Okay, you had a question?
Oh yeah. Thank you all. First of all, really thank you all for this informative information. I guess I'm gonna have to play the spokesman for those who are optimistic in the thought, or and I ain't gonna say such much as the fear of, but there's a lot of people who have a fear of it, because my thing is this: if we first started off with the first vaccine shot, then they turned around and said you needed a second shot, then they turned around and said you need a third shot. After this third shot, here they come with the booster, then they come in with another booster, and now from what I'm hearing, there's a fifth, total of 5. How can you or how can the doctors rest assured to the public that it's safe if we're taking multiple of shots or vaccines to say this is supposed to cure? Because a lot of them said it cured it, which was false. It's not curing something that's been here long before man in existence at some point. So what is a safe measurement of this vaccine? Because at some point they were targeted, saying it was targeted for certain groups to remove to depopulate in order for make things right. And so my question again is that how do we say to the people that one shot is significant if we have 5? Where's the extra 4 coming from, and why?
Well, I'm going to jump in from the general pediatrics angle. I'm not going to be, I would love Dr. Henry or Dr. Davis or Dr. Evers to talk more about the science behind boosters. But let me just say one thing. I see babies at age 2 months. And I think if you have children, you remember they get a vaccine. That's sort of the first traumatic event for the family. The 2-month-old gets their set of vaccines. And then they come back 2 months later and they get another set. So I know there are parents on the line that remember this. And then they come back 2 months later and they get another set of vaccines. Guess what? Those were all the same vaccine. Those were boosters. So the concept of boosters for vaccinations has existed for a very, very long time. If parents remember, they do those vaccines and then they have to come back at age 4 and they get other vaccines. Guess what? They're a repeat of the 2, 4, and 6 months. So multiple vaccinations it dates back for a long time. This is not just a COVID phenomenon.
Correct.
What are we trying to do? Why do we do this? Each time you get an immunization, each time you get a vaccine, your body does respond by producing these antibodies. And it's too bad we don't have time to really talk about how the immune system really works. But antibodies is one way in which we fight infection. Your body responds to that initial injection by producing antibodies if it's effective and if it's an efficient vaccine, which it is. COVID vaccine is quite efficient, produces a level of antibodies. But unfortunately, those antibody levels don't hang around at the same level forever, which is why we boost children. That the vaccines you get at 2 months, you got to get them again at 4, because over that period of time, the level of antibodies drop. And what we found was the level of antibodies against the COVID vaccine dropped fairly rapidly, fairly rapidly. And that's the booster. Now, your question about how many times are we going to have to boost? This is a new vaccine. This is a new vaccine, and it is a new organism that we are learning, even in the science community, learning about what would be best to protect people. One thing that got a bit of information that went out, and I think I understand it, was that you get the vaccine, you never get COVID. In a sense, you hope for that, right? We always hope for something that will prevent an infection. But really what the vaccine's job is to give that individual the ability to fight the infection. And so what you have seen over the months and over the years is a reduction in mortality because people are now equipped with antibodies to fight against the infection. People, why did I get COVID? I took the vaccine. I got COVID anyway. But you're here to tell the story, thank God, right? You're here to tell that story because your body had an antibody, a level of antibody that was sufficient to fight the infection. So I wanted to say, because this is a question I get all the time in my clinic. I still have a lot of people who are fearful, as you say, not so much about how many boosters are going to be needed, but what is it? What is it to? Did they do all the tests? What do you mean use it for emergency? What do you mean it's not officially approved? Those are the kinds of concerns. And what I say is that there were no shortcuts in the production of the vaccine. An ability to generate the vaccine in a quicker fashion does not necessarily mean that we cut corners. There were no corners cut. All of those phases were satisfied. And it's an effective vaccine. If I can say one more thing, because the other thing I hear in my clinic all the time is a reaction to, but I was sicker. I was way sicker after the vaccine, okay? I was fine until I got the vaccine. What a lot of folks don't realize is your body's response to even an infection, like when you get pus in an area that's infected, those are actually your immune cells converging at the site. The swelling is an increase in blood flow to bring all of those, that army, I say, it's an army against bringing the blood to that area. So it gets swollen, it gets red, it gets hot. Your achiness is your body's immune system on fire, turned on, switched on. So when you're feeling that, it's your body's defense that's doing it. So of course you're going to feel achy, you're going to feel some of those symptoms as we artificially boost your immune system with a vaccine, as opposed to boosting it with the actual infection, the actual disease, right? So I tell folks, yes, when you get a vaccine, even at 2 months and 4 months, your kid might get a fever. Your kid might be irritable. Your kid might not want to eat because the body is now been boosted. That immune system is awake and active. So a lot of these things are really important to tell folks beforehand when they get immunizations, because they think that we've done something to them because now, oh, my nose is running and now I feel achy. That's actually a sign that your body is reacting to the vaccine.
I do want to kind of piggyback off that. Oh, Dr. Herbs, did you want to say something? I'm sorry.
I had a question for her too, because but go ahead, Dr. Herbs.
Oh, no, I was just going to add to that about safety. I think a lot of times people don't know that we have institutional review boards in place. And what those are, they actually approve these studies. They want to make sure the benefits of these studies outweigh the risk. So when you think about how this vaccine was made in the process, it was being monitored very closely to make sure that the outcomes we will hope outweigh the benefits will outweigh the risk. And that's what we have seen throughout this process. It's no different. The medicines that we take every day, what you go to the pharmacy and get, what you get off the shelf, all of those drugs went through clinical trials, just like the vaccine that you had. So I just wanted to reassure the public that, there are people monitoring this process. And even now, if something happens, we highly encourage people to report what happened so we can monitor, so we can know what's going on. And if they need to do something differently, they can. So I just wanted to add that to what Dr. Callahan has stated.
And just to tie into the question, I just want to add that there has been a lot of new terminology around, engaging with the public and vaccines and science. And so one of the key things about why so many boosters is, not everybody responds to the vaccine in the same way or the virus in the same way. So the reason why there are multiple, what you're hearing, booster versus dose, some of those are doses and some are boosters. Now, some people don't have a very robust immune system, so those are immunocompromised people. So their regimen was a bit different because they suffer from a weakened immune system. So it was recommended for them to get an extra dose rather than a booster. So because we have different populations of people that respond differently, it was hard to keep track of all the terminology and the number of doses and boosters. But I think we're at a point where we're learning how to convey this information to the public. And so that's why you hear a certain number of additional doses or boosters.
Dr. Callahan, I wanted to reassure you that we're going to be doing a series on this right here. So what we don't be able to touch on today, we will definitely bring y'all back so we can touch on it some more and make a series out of it so people can be more aware or become more comfortable or be able to make a choice with actual information than just going on rumors. Now, Dr. Evers, what type of programs that you implement to try to help individuals understand what they're going through for us with the vaccines and the COVID and things like that?
So Dr. Davis and I partnered early during the pandemic. We recognized people would have questions, and just like we did, because we wanted to know what was going on, where did COVID come from, how was this vaccine made so quickly, and so we wanted to be a part of that and answering questions. So we went through a process. We developed our program called Your COVID Vax Facts. It's an online webpage where we actually engage the community to hear what their concerns were around the COVID-19 vaccine. And we developed a page that we thought would provide the information in a way that could be understood. Because, sometimes we as scientists, we want to talk, using this language, as Dr. Davis had already mentioned. And so we provide the factual information, updated information to let people know what's going on with the vaccine and hope that people can make an informed decision. So that's one way we develop. When we go out in the community, we have posters, postcards, we're mailing door hangers, because we're trying to get that information out so that people won't have the misinformation that they're constantly hearing about this vaccine.
Okay. I have something to add. With Dr. Henry, I'm gonna go back to you first, and then the rest next will be for anyone that wants to answer.
I'm only going to say he's going to Dr. Henry because he's biased because he's from Freeport. But we can go ahead on with that.
It's
That's
all good.
Yeah. Well, when you first stated about the first stage of willing participants, basically what I'm asking is the steps to go and have these examines processed, meaning are you testing it on animals first or people first, or how is that process made known? Because again, we hear so many different things that it develops. The number one thing that will always attract attention is fear. So I want to make sure that we disseminate any false informations to give a better understanding of how this process begins with vaccines. So that's my first part question. And my other question to each and everyone who can answer is, I'm just going to state for myself, I have not been vaccinated. I am against getting vaccinated, but here's my reason why. I caught COVID in the very beginning, and I've caught it 3 times. And I've had similar, very, very rough situations going through it. And then I had the next, no problems. And when I went and got retested to the doctor, the first thing he said was, oh, when we're testing you again, the virus will still be in you. So you're going to test negative when we check to make sure you're, whether to say you're okay or not. The moment he tested me, he said, oh my God, I'm shocked. You're fine. Your body is more healthy than I ever realized. Then he asked me if he could take some blood samples. I was like, no. So I just want to see, like I said, I'm going to say how it is for the realness of me, because I want this to be known, because there probably are other people like myself who really want the truth and facts behind this, because people have underlying issues. that may say they need this to help that portion. But if somebody who's like myself, I don't have asthma, I don't have certain things that it's most common to attack the immune system of. So I want to know what's the what when it comes to this for somebody like myself who, like I said, I caught COVID 3 times. I'm fine and healthy, and they wanted to take more blood to see if I could be a donor for something. And I'm like, no, we're not doing that. So, Dr. Henry, I appreciate you to answer that, my first part, and then the panel's open for everybody else, and not just because you're from Freeport, but it's all good. It's still Exit 21.
And you must be on the basketball team, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
No, Jermaine, you and I are due a trip back to Freeport, but that's another topic. So to just answer your first question about are vaccines and medications tested in animals before they're tested in humans, the answer to that is yes. Okay. It's tested because we want to have a sense of what kind of side effects, what kind of problems could happen if we gave the vaccine to humans. It's possible that you could test in animals and decide never to go to humans because the abnormalities that happen, whether in lab values or, when they actually vaccinate animals, they actually are dissecting the animals too, in what they refer to as post-mortem. Essentially, they're doing an autopsy on the animals to see the effect of what they've administered. And it's possible that you could see, you know what, we don't like that effect. It's not suitable to go into humans. In the case of coronavirus vaccines, some testing happened before the human trials, but then some testing was ongoing at the time of the human trials as well. But every single medicine or vaccine that you've taken has been tested in animals as a precaution, right? And there's all sorts of, people who are looking at animal welfare and making sure we reduce the number of animals that are tested and making sure there's not cruelty to animals, etc. But they are tested in animals before being tested in humans. Now, your other question about, well, I've had, your question around, well, I've had it before, I've had it multiple times is a really very common question. I like the way Dr. Callahan expressed that we know that we are not going to prevent you from getting the infection. What we are going to prevent is you from getting sick and hopefully you from dying from the infection. That's what the vaccines really are doing. The studies have shown that the antibodies, what your body is making to fight the virus, actually last longer and actually are often higher following the shots than following the infection itself. That's a second point that I would say. The third and last thing that I will say is that some of the people, of course, you've heard about the people, who were elderly or they had a compromised immune system, so they couldn't fight off viruses well, or they had high blood pressure, or there will be some risk factor, or asthma, as you said, some risk factor that may have made them have a more severe disease. They're also young, healthy people who, because their immune system was triggered and they have a strong immune system, that some of the response that they had to the virus is also what made them quite sick, in terms of having a very highly inflammatory response to the virus. And that's happening to people who are otherwise healthy, and they're so healthy that they have such a great response that it can sometimes be detrimental. So I think overall, all of us are going to be proponents of vaccination. We certainly understand that a lot of people may not want to get vaccinated, but for sure, I think the benefits, again, outweigh any of the risks associated with it. But I'll let others answer to that question.
Well, Dr. Callahan, I have a question for you as well as Dr. Evers. Either one of y'all could be able to answer. Since you work with as a pediatrician, we noticed that initially the adolescents and the children weren't okay for the virus. The vaccine. Now, after a certain time period, they start saying, well, 18 and under to another, 13 was able to get the vaccine. Then it says from 13 to 5, then from 5 down. Why was it selective about who can get this vaccine if it was there to help all of us at the same time?
Well, the studies were not done in the younger populations until later. For one, those studies that you need to have before you can roll out a vaccine, you have to include that age group. So initially, we saw that the corona or SARS was affecting the older population. We saw what we thought was a trend that children somehow were not as affected initially. A lot of attention was placed on the elderly, which we were seeing were having quite detrimental effects from the virus, from the viral infection, and so the focus was on developing vaccines for the older generations. What's very interesting is we weren't really testing children. My theory is that they were being infected all along. They were getting colds, runny nose, cough, and there was a sense that, okay, that's probably just the common cold. We weren't having a lot of children get very sick, although we did have some get very sick and actually succumb to infections and develop all kinds of sequelae. It was happening, but the focus initially was on the older population. When we began to see an increase in the number of children that were affected, and then began to really test children, we were saying they are infected as well. They are COVID positive as well. At the same time, what we were doing is then in Dr. Henry's field, beginning to really develop vaccines for that age group. The dosing is different. The amount in the syringe for the vaccine is different for different ages. So that had to be determined. What is the best dose? Okay. Is there a need for a booster for a certain age group? So I think that's kind of why it seems like it came out of the blue, but it was a focus initially on the adult population. Now the vaccine, at least for Pfizer, is available for 6 months of age and above. Okay, we don't have vaccines for any younger. And if you recall, the flu vaccine also is available at 6 months of age. So 6 months of age, what is the magic of that number? It's looking at the ability of that child, of that infant, to develop an immune response. No sense vaccinating, right? If their immune system, the development of the immune system does not allow for a robust reaction to the vaccine. And so we found that at 6 months, they mount a very good response. And so we have begun to vaccinate. But there's a lot that goes into selecting the dose as well. That is something that's important to know what dose is effective at what age. So that's the main. I think that I'm hoping I'm answering your question.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Also, I wanted to know what do the panel think about individuals who don't get vaccinated and take the holistic route when they're talking about getting sea moss, black seed, vitamin C, elderberry, and all these other different things to combat the coronavirus?
Well, I'm gonna jump in, and then I'd love to hear, Doctor. I'd love to. I'm waiting for that answer too. The reason I'm jumping in is I consider myself a holistic provider as well. I really do walk a careful balance between an allopath and a naturopath. Okay, I'm trained as an allopath. I'm trained as a medical doctor for your conventional modes. However, I am a firm believer in food as medicine and botanical medicine as well. So a lot of times I'm listening out for what people are doing to actually treat not so much the infection, but their symptoms. And a lot of times there are certain herbs and certain botanicals that are effective to sort of reduce the symptoms of COVID. What's not been proven, and they've not seen any studies that have proven that a botanical medication could cure you from COVID or could actually kill the virus. But there is anecdotal and NIH studies that show that certain herbs and certain botanicals are actually helpful in enhancing one's immune system, if you can call it that, providing just general health and wellness that would fortify an individual to fight all infections, not just COVID, but common cold. Which, by the way, coronavirus is the common cold is in the same family. Am I correct, doctors? As COVID, that common cold, that thing that those beautiful, sweet little babies that sneeze and deliver all types of infections from their nose. It's been around forever. That family of viruses. But you can live a lifestyle and eat certain types of food that will actually fortify you and help protect you. But the evidence is not there that it replaces the impact and effectiveness of vaccines. We just don't have those numbers in studies. So I don't tell my patients that, although I tell them to go ahead and take their elderberry.
I want to put a thumbtack in that, right? Double click on that.
Okay.
Because for me, and I'm sorry if someone else is going to say something. For me, this is one of those situations where I say, this is not an or, this is an and, right? Give me everything that's potentially going to be effective. And for me, just like we say hand washing, just like we say social distancing, just like we say masking, just like we say, immune boosters of whatever kind. I'm drinking my lemon water in the morning, every morning, right? But I'm still getting vaccinated because for me, it's an and, it's not an or.
Yeah.
Now, what do you say? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say that's a very good. We often think in with either one or the other, and we have to be mindful that there are a number of roads to health and wellness, right? A number of roads, but you want to be careful not to be focused on one without getting all of the information about the others and seeing them as really working together. It's a collaborative effort. So, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Now, what do you say about individuals who say it didn't affect the homeless community as much as it did the regular population? The ones who were getting vaccines and the ones who were getting the CMOS, that they were saying that individuals were dying off, but the homeless population remained the same.
I hadn't heard that before. Had anyone heard that?
I haven't heard that either.
You mean the number of homeless people maintained?
It's like the homeless population maintained like their same like the demographics, the different numbers or what have you. Like at one point in time in New York, it was real bad, whereas people were dying in droves. And they said that the homeless population, which have a community where they stay amongst themselves, wasn't as affected as much as, those of us who are taking the subways or going out and about amongst the community like that.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know those. Go ahead, Dr. Sorry.
I was going to say, now we have heard that they were viewed as the invisible population, meaning that they were more likely to die off and weren't given as much, I don't want to say the term consideration, but, being looked after as much with COVID-19. So I wouldn't necessarily agree with that statement. And a lot of research studies are starting to show that. And one thing I wanted to talk about very quickly was you mentioned, the people who were unvaccinated. My thoughts. I mean, yeah, we see a lot of people have, survived COVID and are doing well. But something that we're not really talking about is the long-term impact of COVID. So some of the things that have come out, we're seeing diabetes more in people possibly after a COVID-19 diagnosis. Or one recently, I saw something the other day about brain damage. You hear a lot of people talking about mentally, I can't keep up. I just heard a story from someone I saw on the news where she was saying, since I've had COVID, I had to quit my job because I couldn't keep up because it impacted my mental state and how I respond at work. So I think that, for some people who are doing great, that's fine. But we do have studies going on who are monitoring the long-term impact. So it may seem fine now, but that doesn't necessarily mean something won't come up down the road. So we have to keep that into consideration. The third thing I wanted to quickly highlight when we were talking about clinical trials in children, the physiology or the makeup of a child's body is very different from an adult. And so from the research point of view, we have what we call populations that are considered vulnerable. And that means that when we do research, we're going to really consider how we work with that population, and especially when it came to something like a vaccine. Because as Dr. Callahan stated, children, we got to get the dosing right. How much do they need? So it was one thing to have to figure out what the adults needed. And then it was like, oh, now we got to go back. Now this is different. How are we going to tackle this angle differently? Because we have, our babies, these are our children, and we want to make sure we get it right. So I say that to say, as we move forward, I just ask that you offer researchers and pediatricians grace, because as we continue to monitor this vaccine and we want to get the dosing right, and we follow as this vaccine continues to mutate or change form, we have to make sure that we have vaccines that are in place, that are safe, that are effective. And so we're going to constantly work. We're constantly working behind the scenes. So whether it's Dr. Davis at the bench or, Dr. Callahan, Dr. Henry, who are out there like saying, hey, this is what we know. We need you to get the vaccine. Or it's me trying to create the material so that people can make an informed decision. That's why you constantly see updates, because we're constantly working and we want to make sure people are safe.
And that's the reason why we want to make sure that we keep this as a series so we can give the people actual facts and resources and things where the rumors, we can dispel all the rumors at this moment in time. Whether individuals want to take it or not, that's their decision. But they will have the facts on hand where they can say or make a judgment for themselves. So that's one of the reasons why we wanted to have y'all on. We wanted to make this a series because we want to talk about the immunization. We want to talk about us, where are we going to go from being through the pandemic to 2 years down the road, maybe 5 years down the road? How has it affected our lives and how we have to change our lifestyles because of what we just recently came through? So right now, I just want to thank all of y'all for coming on, because we're almost at the end of our time and it's been so informative. I would love to keep going, but sometimes people's attention spans ain't as long as it should. So we have to cut it. But we want to thank y'all for coming on, because we greatly appreciate the information that y'all have been giving us. And you definitely open up some doors where we can research more information. And I would love to get some information from you, Dr. Evers, about some of the programs that you have, for the vaccines and things like that, to read over or even to, pass out, to kill all the rumors, all the misconceptions. We want to make sure that's what we do here on Real to Real, is to dispel all the rumors. We want to make sure we bring the individuals who are qualified to speak on subjects and not, some conspiracy theorists.
Yeah.
So I want to thank y'all for coming on. And Dr. Davis, all I can say is, how you doing, Miss Cherry?
My whole family's probably on, right?
Oh yeah. I think it's very important, just to echo what Josh Amel said, because we want to make sure it's very important for us as Black people to be aware of these things, because it's so targeted for us to live a negative thought instead of giving a positive thought, and to make sure that we do the research, we do the knowledge to gain a better understanding about issues that arrive up, especially to affect our communities. And Dr. Callahan, I love you so much, because what you said, because I was about to ask Dr. Davis, to me, the common cold is the oldest form of the virus, because it's still here. It hasn't been cured, but there's ways of weakening it by doing the certain things that we've done, especially when it comes to our older parents. Like my great grandma used to say, go get that tree, go get that aloe vera tree plant, and we gonna fix these cuts and bruises and everything else, and we gonna mix it up and give you something to take. And all of a sudden I'm feeling better. But the doctors were saying, don't do that. Take this medication, and then so it's like a give and take. Like, wait a minute, which way do we go? So we want to balance it out. Being this is the month of Libra, we want to balance it out right and get the best understanding. And I want to thank each and every one of y'all, because you actually opened up my eyes to a better understanding about the vaccine overtoning the virus itself.
Definitely.
Yeah, glad we were able to do this, because not everyone has access to such spectacular people like Dr. Irvs, Dr. Henry, Dr. Callahan, right? We don't have not everyone has access to a physician or a scientist that they can just call up and ask this information. So we're happy to be here and to come back as often as you'll have us.
Like I said, the doors are always open, and this right here is going to be a series because we really want to touch on the immunization. We want to touch on how it's going to affect us going forward. And then also, too, I'm pretty sure there's a couple of more things that were left out in this conversation when it came down to the coronavirus and the COVID and the SARS and how it done mutated, because we talked about the mutation, but we didn't talk about how it mutated or why it mutated. So want to get a chance to bring y'all back soon so we can talk about why it mutated, how it mutated, and how it affects your immunization and it breaks down your body or don't break down your body. We just want to make sure that we have all the information that we can put out to the people. So again, thank you so much for coming on, Dr. Callahan, Dr. Davis, Dr. Henry, Dr. Evers. And, as we always say, Kay always said, this is your home away from home. The door is always open. Put your feet up and get comfortable.
That's right.
All right.
So
so
before y'all go, if
having
y'all
us.
have anything else y'all would like to say, this opportunity, you're more than welcome to say anything before we get going, because I sure enough have a question in the after party that I want to make sure we clear. We going east and west on exit 21. We going Roosevelt and Freeport.
Now, see, if I had known that this was so important, I was born in New York. Okay. Born in Brooklyn, raised in Queens, and then lost my way.
But Jeanette, was it in proximity to exit 21 on the Southern State Parkway? That's what you're saying.
That I can't answer.
But I want to say this before anything, but it's beautiful to see Black and brown people on this panel, people that looks like us, people that looks like the people that grew up in our community, that are doctors, are scientists, are individuals who are on the front line trying to bring this information out, working toward bringing a better, community. So this was beautiful, but all by itself, to see, Black men, Black women, all on this panel. I'm getting texts now about how beautiful it looks just as a community, and you're showing individuals that as a child growing up in any urban area, any community, that you can grow and become something much more than people ever thought. So I want to thank y'all again for coming on.
My pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having
Take
us.
care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
So we'll stay on for the
Stay on for the after party.
For a few minutes. I'm just gonna pull y'all into the background, and we're gonna
because he ain't gonna do nothing but talk about the days we was at Gals.
Once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Josh Jamel, if you could pull Dr. Evers off for me, please. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for tuning in to the Real to Real 360 show. This has been very informative, and we want to thank each and every one of y'all who commented on. And again, this will come again. We will start our segment number 2. I want to thank all our special doctors on the panel, done an excellent job. And without further ado, we're going to go ahead and close out the show. And remember, information that is right can never be wrong. So all you got to do is make sure you keep doing it for yourself. And I ask you all again, the next time we have our second show, please have your pen and paper. Call us, email us at realreal360.com, or excuse me, realreal360 at gmail.com. Call in, please. It's vital. This is very important for us as a people to know and understand what's going on. All right. We're going to see you when we see you. We hope everybody had a pleasant evening. And this is the Real 360, and we are out.